younger, youngish black woman, identified as black woman, is a Republican, especially now in the age of Trump. Mind you, as I mentioned before, I became a Republican at the end of January of 2016. So about 11 months prior to the election, the duly noted election of President Trump. So it's been about 19 months since I've been a Republican. So, as I said in the book, I believe that there should be a going back to the Republican Party, particularly for Americans of African descent. I'm going to use different terms throughout these videos. I think we should consider and reconsider our different nomenclature or the words we use to describe ourselves and describe each other, because words matter, and we talk about lives mattering, but language does matter as well. So, before I get too far, I left the party, as I said, guns blazing, after the several different times, whether it's me being a campaign manager or being a candidate myself for state delegate in my state, and while I was running for Congress in 2016, and also being a field organizer for the Maryland Democratic Party. I was organizing against the duly elected governor of our state in 2014. It was a huge loss and a huge upset for us Democrats at the time. But of course now, as a Republican and getting to know Governor Hogan and all the other means, the right person did win that position. And I do hope that Governor Hogan gets a second term, because I think Maryland does deserve it. So putting that aside, when I sort of spent a lot more time in the Democratic Party over the last few years, I started to notice a lot of things that really upset me. Namely, how do I say this? I do believe the Democratic Party takes advantage and takes for granted Americans of African descent. So I do believe that the Democratic Party takes for granted and takes advantage of black people here in this country for several different reasons. Namely, first, as an electorate, as a voting base. I know that there are numbers out there, and I'll look them up and post them in this video, but I would say 80 to 85% of the African Americans who vote in elections vote Democratic. Now, when that happens, particularly when African American women vote 9 out of 10 times for one particular party, doesn't matter who's running, they only pull the lever for that party, that's what happens. People kind of treat you as if they already have you in the bag, so there's no reason to kind of campaign for you or focus on your needs, because you're a guarantee. So when you're a guarantee, I have heard it, I've been in those conversations multiple times, where whether it's candidates or organizers or activists or union members, union workers, they'll say, oh, well, they're with us already. Okay, well, when you say that they're with us already, it's like assuming that all the different things that all those people care about, you're going to cover. I would argue you lose your kind of sort of agency in that respect, because when candidates and when parties and elected officials don't actively go for your vote, they really don't care. You think about it, you think about the different policies that are placed out, particularly the ones that affect the economy. And if you really admitted that to yourself, you would realize that you, just like I did, you see that the Democratic Party is taking people for granted. Now, when that also happens, they pander to other communities of color. For example, their drug of choice now are Latinos or Americans of Latin descent. It's a whole kit and caboodle that we can talk about in another video, but when you're campaigning and you have a whole chunk of people already going to vote for you automatically, no matter what, then you forget about them, you're like, whatever, we get them in the bag, let's get another fun group of people. And then you create this chunk of people that are Latinos, right? And you're like, oh, let's see, what do you think Latinos care about? And of course, everybody thinks, oh, immigration. Okay, except for the fact that a lot of people who come to this country from particularly south of the border countries are coming here for positive economic means, meaning most of their values are conservative, whether it's for the economy. Newsflash, most of them are Catholic, so they are very conservative. Technically, they're a base that actually would be serviced better by other people, particularly the Republican Party, but you've got to kind of ignore that and kind of block that out. And instead of identifying those as really core issues for a group of people, you say, okay, well, let's focus on race, let's focus on ethnicity, and confuse the population. So you already have this base who votes for you no matter what, called Black people. And then you, on top of that, add these Latinos and say, oh, there's all this racism. Oh, there's all this, bigotry, especially that party over there. You don't want to pay attention to them. They're all fill in the blank. So now, as a member of that party, I call that, all that pandering, all of the campaigning and the race mongering and the identity politics as short of BS, divisive politics that makes it harder for the average citizen to really see what's really necessary. So when you see that, you kind of see how one particular party acts as if they represent all marginalized people. You have to wonder, who are these marginalized people? Why are they marginalized? In my region, I can only speak for my region, we'll say the DC metro area. So that's the District of Columbia and the states like Maryland and Virginia. We're a very mixed group where there are a lot of people from all different walks of life, all different countries, all different backgrounds. And in this country, we are supposed to be individuals. We all have what we say, like the light of God in each of us, and our job is to be able to tap into that. Everyone has a portion, and you're supposed to be able to tap into that and kind of let your light shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Like, that's a thing that a lot of people believe in. I also happen to believe that too. But when you want people to forget about the real individualism and real individuality that really makes our country great, you figure out, how can we paint the picture of us versus them? When you do us versus them, you kind of divide people, whether it's gay people and straight people and, foreign born and native born and Black, white, Latino, Asian, gay, straight, whatever. Once you divide those chunks into more chunks, again, you deflect from focus of what you really need to focus on. So all that stuff, again, if you really took a chance to really say, like, what's going on, you've got to start there. And you have to think, does the Democratic Party actually represent anything, or do they just represent division and confusion? I would argue that's all they offer, especially if you are afraid of the other party. I was afraid of the Republican Party, I admit. Am I afraid of it now? No, I am one of the strongest supporters. And as I said, you should look at the book. We wrote it all down of what happened to me personally. I did not believe it until it happened to me as well. So you might wonder, okay, Liz, like, yeah, we get it. Yeah, there's kind of some like crazy stuff going on, but you want me to consider the Republican Party? I'm like, heck yeah. The reason why I say you should focus on the Republican Party now is, number one, as I said in the previous video, Americans of African descent were originally Republicans, and the Republican Party was founded to liberate and not only slaves and then now former slaves, but also the average citizen. A lot of the power, like kind of how it is now, a lot of the power in the 1860s was held by the people who had, economic means, whether it's like the bankers in New York, kind of like how it is now, or the plantation owners. Again, we think about the North and South, everybody thinks, oh, everybody owned slaves. Most people didn't. It was just the people who kind of controlled the economic means. The average person in Maryland, for example, had their own farm. They couldn't afford to keep slaves. So if you really think about the reality of it all, the Republican Party was trying to, again, liberate the voices and the power of the average American, citizen. So the fundamental principles of the Republican Party are just that, the power of the American individual. And I guess I gotta take a step back too and focus on the importance of the Union and the United States, or America, or whatever you want to call it. Yes, there were people living here first, and we can talk about that in a whole nother video. But for all intents and purposes, we talk about America, we talk about currently the 50 states. And of course, DC and Guam is a whole another, and Puerto Rico. Nothing simple. But if you think about the United States of America, whatever you consider is that country. We here, I will say this again ad nauseum, are the most powerful citizens in the entire world. Specifically because there is no ethnic relationship to our citizenship. There isn't a kind of like a need for being like a landowner. There's no religious test. There even isn't actually an official, language need to be an American citizen, though you need to be able to interpret and read English. That's a whole nother story we could talk about in another video. But because of that singularity of this republic, the republic was founded to make sure that the citizens determined governance, not the other way around. And I say that to say that it's like kind of almost like fundamentals. We got to go back to fundamentals. Like that's really what the Republican Party represents, is because that's what we're called. Like our sole purpose is to protect the republic. That is what the name stands for. It's the newer party. I think people need to remember that. The Maryland Democratic Party actually is the longest existing established party in the country, if not the world. I'm going to throw that out there. And so when you think, oh, the Democrats seem to really know what they're doing, it's because they've been doing it for a long, long time. They have been an organized party longer than the Republican Party. So now everybody's like, oh, the Republicans seem to not get it together and they can't pass this, can't pass that. It's actually because there's a lot more diversity in the Republican Party. And when I say diversity, I also mean diversity of thought, principles. They're fundamental principles, but there's like a gradation. There's like moderates, there's conservatives, there's libertarians, all under this umbrella. That diversity does not exist in the Democratic Party, especially how it is now. And so when you kind of even just look at the, how they treat Black people, or you could fill in the blank how they treat women, or how they treat gays, or whatever identity politic tool the Democratic Party uses, the challenge is Republicans don't see that. And quite frankly, that's kind of been like the most challenging aspect of being a Republican, is because oddly for the first time, being a Republican, being in this party, I'm just an American. I feel like, well, what does that mean? People don't interact with me as a Black girl. In the Democratic frame of reference, that's all I am. But as a Republican, I'm just a very outspoken American that sees the value of this country and that speaks to its strengths and acknowledges its weaknesses and wants to work harder to make sure that more of us start appreciating our country.